They laughed when the defense attorney pointed at her scuffed thrift store heels. They sneered when the judge read aloud her bank balance of $42. In the cold mahogany-walled courtroom of District 4, Julian Thorne sat with a smug grin, believing he was crushing a helpless, penniless woman who had nothing left to fight with. But the arrogance in that room was about to turn to deathly silence. They thought they were mocking a broke single mother. They didn't realize they had just declared war on the hidden heiress to the Caldwell empire. And by the time she was done, she wouldn't just win custody. She would own the very ground they stood on. The air in the Superior Court of Seattle smelled of stale coffee and expensive cologne, a suffocating mix that made Odetta Vance feel nauseous. She sat alone at the defendant's table, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned the color of old bone. She was wearing her best suit, a charcoal gray ensemble she had bought 5 years ago, but against the polished oak and the sea of navy blue designer suits surrounding her ex-husband, she looked like a stain on a pristine painting. "Your Honor," the voice of Marcus Blackwood, Julian's shark of a lawyer, cut through the room like a serrated knife. "We are not just talking about financial instability here. We are talking about destitution, gross negligence of reality." Blackwood paced in front of the bench, gesturing theatrically toward Odetta without actually looking at her, as if she were too insignificant to warrant eye contact. Ms. Vance is currently residing in a studio apartment in the Rainier Valley District, a neighborhood known for a 40% higher crime rate than the city average. She works double shifts at a diner, leaving our client's daughter, Lily, in the care of an unlicensed neighbor. Her bank statements, which we have submitted as Exhibit C, show a current balance of $42.16. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the gallery. Julian's friends were there. His mother, Catherine Thorne, a woman who wore pearls worth more than Odetta's life earnings, pressed a handkerchief to her nose, as if the mere mention of Odetta's poverty was a foul odor. Odetta didn't flinch. She had learned the art of stillness over the last 3 years of her hellish marriage. But under the table, her leg was trembling. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Alistair Reynolds sighed, looking over his spectacles. He was a man who favored the wealthy. Everyone in the legal circuit knew it. He and Julian's father played golf at the Broadmoor Club on Sundays. "Are you suggesting Ms. Vance is unfit, solely based on income?" "I am suggesting, Your Honor, that love does not buy groceries." Blackwood smirked. "Love does not pay for private school tuition, nor does it secure a safe environment. My client, Mr. Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Tech, earns 7 figures annually. He can provide Lily with the world. Ms. Vance can barely provide a Happy Meal." Julian leaned back in his leather chair, checking his Rolex. He caught Odetta, S.I., and winked, a cold, predatory motion. It was the same look he'd given her the night he told her he was filing for divorce, because she was too boring for his rising social status. Odetta, her own lawyer, a court-appointed public defender named Sarah Miller, whispered frantically, "I need you to give me something. Do you have any family? Anyone who can vouch for financial support? If we don't show stability, Reynolds is going to hand Lily over to him today." Odetta looked at Sarah. The young lawyer was trying, but she was outmatched. She was drowning in paperwork and intimidated by Blackwood. I can get more shifts," Odetta whispered back, her voice raspy. "Shifts won't cut it, Odetta. They are painting you as a destitute charity case." "I object to the characterization." Sarah stood up, her voice cracking slightly. "Ms. Vance is a devoted mother. Poverty is not a crime. It is when it endangers a child." Blackwood shot back smoothly. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we also have reason to believe Ms. Vance is hiding debt. We found unpaid utility bills from last winter. If she cannot keep the heat on, how can she keep a child warm?" "That was 1 month," Odetta blurted out, standing up. "I paid it the next day." "Sit down, Ms. Vance," Judge Reynolds snapped, banging his gavel. "Another outburst and I will hold you in contempt." Odetta sank back into her chair, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. It was a orchestrated hit. Every humiliating detail of her struggle to survive since Julian kicked her out was being paraded for entertainment. Julian leaned over to his lawyer, whispering loud enough for Odetta to hear. "Look at her. She looks like a wet rat. I can't believe I ever slept with that." His mother, Catherine, let out a sharp, cruel giggle from the back row. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing against Odetta's chest. She closed her eyes. They saw a waitress. They saw a failure. They saw a woman who had come into the marriage with nothing and was leaving with nothing. But they were wrong. They didn't know that the Vance in her name was a modification, a shortening. They didn't know that the unlicensed neighbor watching her daughter was actually a retired royal guard working as a private security contractor she paid in cash. And they certainly didn't know that the phone vibrating in her cheap purse contained a text message she had received 10 minutes ago from Zurich. "The transfer is complete, Miss Caldwell. The board is ready when you are." Odetta opened her eyes. She looked at Julian. Really looked at him. For the first time in months. He wasn't a monster. He was a bug. A shiny, expensive beetle about to be crushed by a boot he didn't even know existed. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, looking at his watch, "I'm inclined to agree with your assessment regarding temporary custody. However, I need to review the financials one last time. We will reconvene in 1 hour for the final verdict." "Thank you, Your Honor," Blackwood beamed. Julian stood up, buttoning his jacket. He walked past Odetta's table. He didn't just walk past. He stopped, leaning down so his breath hit her ear. "You should have just signed the papers when I offered you the $5,000, Odetta," he hissed. "Now you lose the kid, and you'll be serving me coffee next week. Enjoy the gutter." He strutted away, high-fiving his lawyer. Odetta watched him go. She picked up her phone. She didn't look at her public defender. She simply stood up, the trembling in her leg gone. "Sarah," Odetta said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the wobble of the scared victim. It was suddenly smooth, cold, and commanding. "Odetta? Where are you going? We need to prep." "You're fired, Sarah," Odetta said calm. "You're a good person, but you're bringing a knife to a nuclear war." "What? You can't fire me. The hearing is in an hour." Odetta walked toward the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. She pulled a burner phone from her pocket and dialed a number that hadn't been dialed in 4 years. "Daddy," she said when the line connected, "I'm done playing commoner." "Send the jet. And bring Arthur. I have a company to buy." To understand the fury that was about to be unleashed on the Seattle Superior Court, one had to understand why Odetta Vance, born Odetta Sterling-Caldwell, was wearing shoes from a discount bin in the first place. 5 years ago, Odetta was the heiress to the Caldwell Group, a global conglomerate with fingers in shipping, pharmaceuticals, and real estate. Her father, William Caldwell, was a man who could change the GDP of a small nation with a signature, but Odetta hated the life. She hated the sycophants, the fortune hunters, and the men who looked at her and saw a walking bank account. She wanted to be loved for her, not for the Caldwell name. So at 22, she did the unthinkable. She ran away. She changed her name, moved to Seattle, and took a job as a waitress at a high-end steakhouse. She cut herself off from the billions, living on tips and a meager salary. That was where she met Julian. Julian Thorne was a rising star in the bottle tech world. He wasn't a billionaire, but he was new money wealthy. He came into the steakhouse, saw the beautiful, quiet waitress, and pursued her. For the first 6 months, it was a fairy tale. Julian seemed to love her simplicity. He told her, "I love that you're not like those plastic society girls. You're real." Odetta fell hard. She thought she had found the one man who didn't care about money. When he proposed, she said yes, without hesitation. She almost told him the truth then, that she could buy his startup 10 times over. But she held back. She wanted to be sure. She wanted to see if the marriage could survive on love alone. That was her mistake. The moment the ring was on her finger, Julian changed. The simplicity he loved became an embarrassment. It started small. "Don't wear that dress, Odetta. You look cheap." Then it became, "Don't speak at the dinner party. You don't understand these business concepts." When she got pregnant with Lily, she thought things would improve. Instead, Julian became distant. He started staying out late. The verbal abuse escalated. He called her a leech. He constantly reminded her that he paid for the roof over her head, that he bought the food she ate. "You are nothing without me," he would scream during their fights. "You're just a waitress I felt sorry for." The irony burned her like acid. She stayed for Lily. She endured the affairs. She knew about the secretary and the PR consultant. She endured the snide comments from his mother, Catherine, who treated Odetta like hired help. The breaking point came 6 months ago. Odetta had found unauthorized charges on the household account. Julian was draining their joint savings to cover gambling debts he was hiding from his investors. When she confronted him, he didn't apologize. He hit her. It wasn't a punch, just a hard shove against the wall, but it was enough. The illusion was shattered. The next day, he served her divorce papers, froze her access to the accounts, and kicked her out of the mansion. He thought he was discarding trash. He didn't know he was waking a sleeping dragon. For 6 months, Odetta lived in poverty, refusing to call her father out of shame. She wanted to prove she could do it on her own. She scrubbed floors, waited tables, and saved every penny for Lily. But today, when Julian threatened to take Lily away forever, when he mocked her inability to feed her child, the shame evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard rage. Outside the courtroom, Odetta stood on the steps of the courthouse. The Seattle rain was drizzling, but she didn't feel it. A black town car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't the usual Uber she took. It was a Mercedes Maybach S-Class, elongated and armored. The window rolled down, and a man with silver hair and a scar running down his cheek looked out. Arthur, her father's fixer. The man who made problems disappear. "Miss Odetta," Arthur said, his voice like gravel. "Your father is in Tokyo, but he is watching the live feed. He is displeased with Mr. Thorne." Odetta opened the back door and slid onto the cream leather seats. The smell of poverty, the stale bus exhaust and cheap detergent, was instantly replaced by the scent of fresh leather and money. "Displeased is an understatement, Arthur," Odetta said, kicking off her scuffed heels. She opened a hidden compartment and pulled out a pair of Christian Louboutin pumps she had kept stashed in her emergency go-bag Arthur had brought. "The hearing reconvenes in 45 minutes, Arthur said, handing her a tablet. "This is the dossier on Julian Thorne. We found the offshore accounts in the Caymans. We also found the emails proving he's been embezzling from his own investors." Odetta swiped through the files. It was a massacre. Julian wasn't just cruel. He was a criminal. "And the lawyer? Blackwood?" Arthur smiled, a terrifying expression. "Mr. Blackwood falsified evidence in a case 3 years ago. We have the witness ready to recant via video link." Odetta looked out the tinted window at the courthouse. Julian was probably in the cafeteria right now, laughing with his mother, eating a miserable sandwich, thinking he had won. She reached for the garment bag hanging in the back. "Drive around the block, Arthur," Odetta said, unbuttoning her cheap polyester blazer. "I need to change. When we walk back into that courtroom, Odetta the waitress is dead." "And who is walking in?" Arthur asked, though he already knew the answer. Odetta pulled out a tailored white suit. Italian silk, sharp enough to cut glass, worth more than Julian's car. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The fear was gone. The eyes staring back were the eyes of William Caldwell's daughter. "The CEO of Caldwell Industries," she whispered, "and the new owner of Thorne Tech." The hallway outside courtroom 4B was quiet, save for the hum of the vending machine and the distant murmur of other legal battles. Inside, Judge Reynolds was rubbing his temples, annoyed that the 5-minute recess had stretched into 15. "Where is the defendant?" Reynolds grumbled, checking the clock on the wall. "Mr. Blackwood, if your ex-wife doesn't return in 60 seconds, I'm ruling in default." Julian laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "She probably ran, Your Honor. She knows she can't pay the court fees. She's likely halfway to the bus station by now." Catherine Thorne leaned forward, patting her son's shoulder. "It's for the best, darling. Lily needs stability, not a mother who runs away when things get tough." Blackwood stood up, buttoning his jacket. I move for immediate dismissal of Ms. Vance's parental rights based on abandonment, Your Honor. I'm inclined to clack. The sound was singular, sharp, and echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Clack, clack, clack. It was the sound of heels on marble. Not the scuffed, rubber-soled shoes Odetta had worn earlier. These were hard, deliberate steps. The rhythm of authority. The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They swung wide as if pushed by a gale-force wind. 2 men in black suits entered first. They were broad, wearing earpieces, their eyes scanning the room with professional indifference. They weren't court bailiffs. They were private security. Then she walked in. For a moment, Julian didn't recognize her. The woman who entered was wearing a white, tailored suit that fit her like a second skin. The fabric shimmered slightly under the fluorescent lights, shantung silk. Her hair, previously pulled back in a messy, frazzled bun, was now cascading down her shoulders in sleek, ironed waves. Her face was scrubbed of the exhaustion that had plagued her for months, replaced by a makeup application that was subtle but severe. Her lips were a deep blood red. But it was the air around her that had changed. The hunched shoulders of the beaten housewife were gone. She walked with a spine of steel. Behind her trailed 4 men carrying leather briefcases. They moved in a V formation, like a phalanx of soldiers protecting their general. "Who is this?" Judge Reynolds asked, squinting. "This is a closed hearing." "Apologies for the delay, Your Honor." A deep, baritone voice boomed from the man walking directly to Odetta's right. He was older, with silver hair and a scar running down his cheek. Arthur. But next to him was a man the entire legal world of Seattle knew by reputation alone, Lysander Graves. The courtroom went dead silent. Even Blackwood, Julian's shark of a lawyer, paled. Lysander Graves didn't handle divorce cases. He handled mergers, international treaties, and high-stakes corporate espionage. His hourly rate was rumored to be more than Julian's annual salary. "Mr. Graves?" Judge Reynolds stammered. I wasn't aware you were on this docket." "I was retained 7 minutes ago," Graves said, his voice smooth as velvet, but cold as ice. He walked to the defense table, where Sarah Miller's messy files were still scattered, and swept them aside with one hand to place his own singular, slim, gold-embossed folder on the wood. Julian stared at Odetta, his mouth slightly open. He blinked, trying to reconcile this image with the woman who had begged him for grocery money 2 days ago. "Odetta?" Julian whispered. Then, his shock turned to a sneer. He stood up. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. My ex-wife is clearly mentally unstable. She's rented a costume. She's spent the last of her money on a makeover to impress the court." He turned to Odetta, his face twisting in disgust. "Who did you sleep with to get that suit, Odetta? Or did you steal it? Did you max out a credit card you don't have?" Odetta didn't look at him. She didn't even blink. She sat down in the defendant's chair, crossing her legs. She looked at her fingernails, then looked up at the judge. "My client," Graves interrupted, stepping between Julian and Odetta, effectively blocking Julian's view, "is fully prepared to proceed. And regarding the accusation of theft, I would be careful, Mr. Thorne. Slander is an expensive hobby." "Slander?" Blackwood sputtered, trying to regain control. "Your Honor, 10 minutes ago this woman was indigent. Now she walks in here with Lysander Graves? I demand to know who is funding this legal circus. If she is hiding assets, that is fraud." Judge Reynolds looked at Odetta. The transformation was unsettling him. "Ms. Vance, this is highly irregular. Mr. Blackwood has a point. If your financial status has changed, you are required to disclose it." Odetta finally spoke. Her voice was not the rasp of a tired waitress. It was the polished, mid-Atlantic accent of the boarding schools she had attended in her youth, an accent she had suppressed for years to fit into Julian's world. "My financial status has not changed, Your Honor," Odetta said coolly. "My access to my financial status has simply been restored." "What does that mean?" Julian shouted. "She's lying. She's a waitress. She scrubs tables for tips." "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," the judge warned. "No, I want answers." Julian pointed a trembling finger at Odetta. "You think playing dress-up changes anything? I have the bank statements. You have $42. You are nothing." Odetta turned her head slowly, fixing Julian with a gaze so devoid of emotion it made him flinch. "Proceed, Mr. Graves," Odetta said softly. "Let's finish this." Lysander Graves didn't just practice law, he performed surgery. He stood before the bench, buttoning his suit jacket with a casual elegance that made Blackwood look like a used car salesman. "Your Honor," Graves began, "the plaintiff, Mr. Thorne, has built his entire case for custody on a single pillar: financial superiority. He claims he is the only one capable of providing for the child because he is a successful CEO, and my client is destitute." "The facts speak for themselves," Blackwood interjected. "Do they?" Graves smiled. "I would like to call Mr. Julian Thorne to the stand regarding his financial affidavit." Julian smirked and adjusted his tie. He loved talking about his money. He strode to the witness stand, took the oath, and sat down, winking at his mother in the gallery. Graves approached the stand, holding a single piece of paper. "Mr. Thorne, you stated under oath that your annual income is $1.2 million, and your assets total roughly $8 million. Is that correct?" "Give or take," Julian said breezily. "Market fluctuates, you know how it is. But yes, the company is doing fantastic. Thorne Tech is leading the market in AI integration." "Leading the market," Graves repeated. "And you stated that you can provide the best education, healthcare, and lifestyle for your daughter Lily." "Absolutely. She's enrolled in St. Jude's for next semester. I've already paid the deposit." "And you cited Ms. Vance's inability to pay a $150 heating bill as proof of her negligence? If you can't keep the lights on, you can't raise a kid. It's simple logic," Julian said, looking at the judge for approval. Graves nodded slowly. He walked back to his table and picked up a thick stack of documents. "Mr. Thorne, are you familiar with the concept of piercing the corporate veil?" Julian frowned. "I'm a CEO, not a lawyer. I know what it means." "Good. Then you must know that hiding personal debt within company accounts is illegal, and lying about it on a financial affidavit in family court is perjury." The room went quiet. Blackwood stood up. "Objection. Relevance?" "Goes to credibility and financial stability, Your Honor," Graves shot back. "I have here the internal ledgers of Thorne Tech for the last 3 quarters. "Mr. Thorne, isn't it true that Thorne Tech has not made a profit in 14 months? Julian's face flushed. That's overhead. R&D. We're investing in growth." "Isn't it true," Graves continued, his voice rising slightly, "that you have taken out 3 personal loans against the company's equity, totaling $4 million, to pay for gambling debts in Macau and Las Vegas?" The gallery gasped. Catherine Thorne clutched her pearls. "That's a lie!" Julian shouted. "Those were business trips." "Business trips?" Graves pulled a receipt from the stack. "We have records from the Bellagio. $400,000 lost in one night at the baccarat table. Dated the same week you told Ms. Vance you couldn't afford to fix her car's transmission." Julian gripped the railing of the witness stand. "You hacked my records. This is inadmissible." "These are public records from a lawsuit filed against you by the casino, Mr. Thorne. It was settled out of court, but the filing exists." Graves didn't let up. "Furthermore, isn't it true that your house, the mansion you claim provides such a stable environment, is currently in pre-foreclosure?" "No." Julian stood up. "I missed 1 payment. It was a banking error." 3 payments, Mr. Thorne, January, February, and March." Graves turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiff is insolvent. He is living on credit, borrowing from loan sharks, and embezzling from his own company to keep up appearances. He has less liquid cash than my client had in her tips jar. This is preposterous," Blackwood screamed. "My client is a respected tech mogul." Graves turned to Blackwood. "Your client is a fraud. And we haven't even gotten to the part where he used his daughter's savings account, the one he claims to protect, to pay the lease on his mistress's Porsche. Odetta watched Julian. He was sweating now. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by the frantic look of a trapped animal. He looked at her, searching for the submissive wife who would usually step in to smooth things over, to take the blame. But Odetta just watched him. She took a sip of water. You bitch, Julian mouthed at her from the stand. Mr. Thorne, the judge slammed his gavel. Watch your language or I will have you removed. She's doing this, Julian shouted, pointing at Odetta. She's ruining me. How are you paying for this, Odetta? Huh? Did you prostitute yourself? Mr. Thorne, stand down, the judge bellowed. I want to know. Julian was unraveling. She's a nobody. She's trash. She comes from nothing. Odetta stood up. The movement was so graceful, yet so commanding, that the judge paused his gavel midair. Mr. Graves, Odetta said, her voice carrying to the back of the room without shouting. I believe it's time to correct the record regarding my nothingness. Odetta walked to the center of the room. She didn't approach the witness stand. She approached the bench directly. Your Honor, Odetta said, my ex-husband is under the impression that I am Odetta Vance, a woman born in Ohio to a factory worker who dropped out of college. That was the story I told him, because I wanted to be sure he loved me for me, not my inheritance. Julian laughed nervously. Inheritance? What? Your grandma left you a trailer park? Odetta turned to him. The look in her eyes was almost pitying. Mr. Blackwood, Odetta said, addressing the opposing lawyer. You asked earlier about my bank balance. You mocked the $42. She signaled to Arthur. The silver-haired man stepped forward and handed a document to the judge, and a copy to Blackwood. This is a certified letter from the Union Bank of Switzerland, Odetta said. It verifies the reactivation of my trust fund, which I voluntarily froze 5 years ago. Judge Reynolds put on his glasses. He looked at the paper. His eyes widened. He took off his glasses, cleaned them, and looked again. He looked at Odetta, then back at the paper. Ms. Vance, is this figure correct? The judge stammered. It is, Your Honor. What is it? Julian demanded. Did she win the lottery? 10 grand? 20? Mr. Thorne, the judge said, his voice trembling slightly. The balance listed here is $1.2 billion. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, physical. It pressed against the eardrums. Billion? Julian stuttered. With a B? That is just the liquid cash in the trust, Odetta continued calmly. It does not include my shares in the family holding company. Family holding company? Blackwood whispered, looking at the document. He read the name at the top. His face went white. He dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor. Caldwell, Blackwood whispered. Oh, my God, you're a Caldwell. My name, Odetta said, her voice ringing out, is Odetta Sterling-Caldwell. My father is William Caldwell, founder of Caldwell Industries. Julian slumped back into the witness chair as if he'd been shot. Caldwell Industries. The company that owned the shipping lines his tech parts came in on. The company that owned the bank his mortgage was with. The company that effectively owned Seattle. No, Julian whispered. No, that's impossible. You clip coupons. You wear thrift store clothes. I treated you like. He trailed off as the realization hit him. The memories of every insult. Every time he called her cheap. Every time he made her beg for money. He had been starving a woman who could buy and sell his entire existence before breakfast. You treated me like I was worthless, Odetta finished for him. Because you thought I had no value. You showed me exactly who you are, Julian. You loved the idea of saving a poor girl, but the moment I became a burden, you threw me away. She turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I am not requesting alimony. I don't need his money. I am requesting full custody of my daughter to protect her from a man who is morally bankrupt and, as Mr. Graves has proven, financially ruined. Wait, Julian scrambled up. Odetta, baby, wait. This changes things. We're married. Technically, we're still married until the decree is signed. That money, half of that is mine. It's marital assets. He looked at Blackwood. Right? She hid assets. I'm entitled to half. I can save the company. Odetta, honey, think about us. We can be a power couple. The audacity was breathtaking. The gallery murmured in disgust. Even Catherine Thorne looked at her son with shame. Odetta laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. Mr. Graves, she said, please show him Exhibit F. Graves handed Julian one last document. What is this? Julian asked, his hands shaking. That, Odetta said, is a notification of debt acquisition. While you were testifying, Caldwell Industries purchased the promissory notes for your business loans and your mortgage. Julian stared at the paper. You? You bought my debt? I own your debt, Julian, Odetta said, stepping closer to him until she was inches from the witness box. I own your house. I own your car. I own the servers your company runs on. And as of 10 minutes ago, I called in the loans. Julian's eyes bulged. You can't do that. That's immediate bankruptcy. You're destroying me. You tried to take my daughter, Odetta said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. You tried to leave me on the street. I am simply returning the favor. By the time you walk out of this courthouse, the only thing you will own is the suit on your back. And if I remember correctly, I bought that for you with my tip money. She turned her back on him and looked at the judge. I am ready for your ruling, Your Honor. The silence that followed Odetta's declaration was shattered by the frantic ringtone of a cell phone. It was Julian's. Usually, a phone ringing in Judge Reynolds' courtroom resulted in immediate confiscation, but Reynolds didn't move. He sat frozen, watching the tragedy unfold. Julian fumbled for the phone, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. It was his chief financial officer. Answer it, Julian, Odetta said, her voice deceptively soft. I believe they're calling to tell you that security is currently escorting your staff out of the building. Julian put the phone to his ear. Hello, Mark? Tell me it's not true. Tell me we're okay. The voice on the other end was hysterical, loud enough for the front row to hear. They're here, Julian. Auditors. Dozens of them. They have a court order. They're seizing the servers, the prototypes, everything. They say the company is in default. And the SEC is here looking for you. Julian dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the screen cracking, a fitting metaphor for his life. Your Honor. Lysander Graves stepped forward, smoothing his tie. Given the revelation of Mr. Thorne's imminent bankruptcy and the pending federal investigation into his embezzlement, which we have just handed over to the district attorney, we move for immediate, sole legal and physical custody of Lily Vance to be awarded to her mother. Granted, Judge Reynolds said instantly. He didn't even look at the paperwork. He looked at Julian with unmasked disdain. Mr. Thorne, you are a flight risk and a fraud. Custody is awarded to Miss Sterling-Caldwell, effective immediately. Visitation is suspended until further notice. No! Julian screamed, lunging toward the table. You can't do this. Mom, do something. Catherine Thorne, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly stood up, but she didn't rush to comfort her son. She rushed toward the aisle. I didn't know, Catherine cried out, looking directly at Odetta. Odetta, darling, please. I had no idea he was doing this. You know how much I've always loved you and Lily. I told him to treat you better. Odetta turned slowly to face her former mother-in-law. The woman who had criticized Odetta's cooking, her clothes, and her background for 3 years. The woman who had giggled when Julian called her a wet rat. You loved me? Odetta asked, tilting her head. Catherine, last Christmas you gave me a book on etiquette for the lower classes and told me to read it so I wouldn't embarrass Julian at parties. Catherine turned beet red. It was a joke, a gag gift. We're family, Odetta. Grandma loves Lily. You wouldn't keep a grandmother from her grandchild because of a misunderstanding about money, would you? It's not about money, Catherine, Odetta said, signaling her security team. It's about character, and you have none. Odetta nodded to Arthur. Have Mrs. Thorne removed from the courtroom. And Arthur? Ensure the eviction notice for her condo is served by end of day. Since Julian paid for it with embezzled funds, it's now company property. You can't! Catherine shrieked as two security guards gently but firmly escorted her out. I'm an old woman. I have nowhere to go. I hear the Rainier Valley has affordable studio apartments, Odetta called out after her. It builds character. Julian was hyperventilating, loosening his tie. He looked at his lawyer. Blackwood, fix this! Sue her! Sue everyone! Marcus Blackwood, the shark who had been so eager to destroy Odetta an hour ago, was hurriedly packing his briefcase. Mr. Thorne, Blackwood said coldly. My retainer was paid via a corporate check from Thorne Tech. Since that account is now frozen and likely proceeds of crime, I am no longer your attorney. I'll be withdrawing from the case. You can't leave me. I can, and I am. I don't represent felons without upfront cash. Blackwood snapped his briefcase shut and practically ran out the side door, not wanting to be associated with the sinking ship. Julian was alone, truly alone. The courtroom doors opened again, but this time it wasn't a lawyer. Two uniformed officers and a detective in a plain suit walked in. They approached the defense table where Julian stood trembling. Julian Thorne? The detective asked. Please, Julian whispered, tears streaming down his face. Please, I can fix it. I just need time. You are under arrest for securities fraud, grand larceny, and embezzlement, the detective recited, pulling out handcuffs. As the metal cuffs clicked around Julian's wrists, the same wrists that wore the Rolex he had flashed at Odetta earlier, he looked up at her one last time. Odetta, he sobbed. I loved you. In the beginning, I really did. Doesn't that count for anything? Odetta walked over to him. She stood close enough that he could smell the expensive perfume she now wore, a scent he had never bothered to buy her. You loved the waitress who worshipped you, Julian, she said softly. You loved having someone small to make yourself feel big, but you never knew me. Not really. She leaned in, her voice a whisper only he could hear. You asked for a settlement earlier? Here it is. I'm going to put Lily through the best schools in the world. She will grow up strong, kind, and powerful, and she will never, ever be made to feel small by a man like you. That is my settlement. Take him away, she said to the officers. Julian screamed her name as he was dragged out, his expensive Italian shoes scuffing against the floor, leaving black marks that would be scrubbed away by the janitor later that night, just as Julian was being scrubbed from Odetta's life. 3 months later, the view from the 44th floor of the Caldwell Tower was not just a view, it was a statement. From here, the gray drizzle of Seattle looked less like a gloomy blanket and more like a watercolor painting washing over the empire Odetta now commanded. Odetta Sterling-Caldwell stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, her reflection ghosting against the skyline. She wasn't wearing the polyester uniform that smelled of fry oil anymore. She was draped in a midnight blue cashmere wrap dress, her hair polished into a sleek professional wave. But the transformation wasn't just cosmetic. It was in the way she stood, shoulders back, weight evenly distributed, the posture of a woman who no longer flinched when a door slammed. The last 90 days had been a blur of headlines, lawyers, and corporate restructuring. The media had dubbed her the Cinderella CEO, a nickname she loathed. Cinderella needed a fairy godmother to save her. Odetta had saved herself. She had just used her father's sword to do it. There was a soft knock on the heavy oak door. Come in, she said, turning away from the city. Chloe, her new executive assistant, a sharp, organized young woman who was terrifyingly efficient, stepped in. Ms. Caldwell, The liquidation team has finished the audit of the Thorne Tech headquarters. They're asking for your final walkthrough before we hand the building over to the real estate agents. Odetta felt a cold flicker in her chest. Thorne Tech. The glass and steel monument to Julian's ego. Is the building empty? Odetta asked. Completely. The staff has been relocated to our Bellevue campus or given severance packages. It's just a shell now. Get the car, Odetta said, grabbing her coat. I want to see it. The drive to the South Lake Union district was silent. Arthur drove the armored Maybach with his usual stoic precision. When they pulled up to the curb of what used to be Thorne Tech, the signage was already gone. The sleek chrome letters spelling Thorne had been pried off the facade, leaving only the ghostly outline of dirt where they had once been glued. Odetta stepped out. The lobby, once bustling with tech bros and sycophants hoping to catch Julian's eye, was silent. It smelled of dust and industrial cleaner. She walked to the elevators, her heels clicking on the terrazzo floor. She pressed the button for the top floor, Julian's office. When the doors opened, the space felt smaller than she remembered. When she had come here as his wife, begging him to sign a permission slip for Lily or asking for money for groceries, this room had felt like a cathedral where she was a sinner. Now, it was just a room. The mahogany desk was gone, sold at auction to pay off a creditor. The Eames chair was gone. The shelves were bare. But there was one thing left. In the corner, piled in a cardboard box marked trash, were the personal items the auditors deemed worthless. Odetta walked over and peered inside. It was a graveyard of vanity. There was a cracked frame containing a photo of Julian shaking hands with the mayor, a photo he had paid a PR firm to stage. There was a plaque for Innovator of the Year from a magazine that no one read. And at the bottom, face down, was a picture of Odetta and Lily. It was from Lily's first birthday. Odetta looked tired but happy, holding a cake she had baked herself. Julian wasn't in the photo. He had been working late that night. Odetta reached in and picked up the photo. She brushed the dust off the glass. He left this, a voice said from the doorway. Odetta didn't jump. She turned to see Lysander Graves standing there, looking out of place in the empty office in his three-piece suit. He packed his golf trophies, Lysander said, walking into the room. He packed his humidor. He packed the signed basketball jersey. But he left the photo of his daughter. Odetta looked at the picture one last time, then dropped it back into the trash box. He didn't leave it, Lysander. He never really saw it. To Julian, people were just props. When the prop stops making you look good, you discard it. Speaking of Mr. Thorne, Lysander said, pulling a file from his briefcase. The transfer to Monroe Correctional Complex is complete. He's been processed. General population. How is he handling it? Poorly, Lysander admitted with a dry, humorless smile. He tried to offer the warden stock options in exchange for a private cell. It took them 20 minutes to explain that his stock is currently trading at $0.00. And the plea deal? Ironclad. 5 years for embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion. He'll be eligible for parole in 3, but given his attitude, I doubt the board will be sympathetic. Oh, and he sent this. Lysander held out a white envelope. It was wrinkled, the handwriting jagged and desperate. Odetta took it. She ran her thumb over the cheap paper. She could imagine Julian sitting in a concrete cell writing this. Was he apologizing? Was he begging? Was he blaming her? She thought about the night he locked her out of the house in the rain because she forgot to pick up his dry cleaning. She thought about the way he mocked her in court, laughing while his lawyer called her a beggar. Do you want to read it? Lysander asked. Odetta walked over to the shredder that the movers had left unplugged in the corner. She didn't plug it in. Instead, she ripped the envelope in half. Then, in quarters, then, into tiny, jagged squares of white snow. No, Odetta said, opening her hand and letting the pieces flutter to the floor, mixing with the dust of his empty empire. I know what it says. It says, I want. That's all Julian ever said. What he wants doesn't matter anymore. She stepped over the confetti of his last words and headed for the door. Burn the box, Lysander. Everything in it. I don't want a single trace of him left in this city. 2 hours later, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The Rusty Spoon Diner on Rainier Avenue was loud, smelling of bacon grease, strong coffee, and damp raincoats. It was the lunch rush. When the black Maybach pulled up, the patrons stopped chewing. In this neighborhood, cars like that usually meant a drug bust or a politician looking for a photo op. Odetta stepped out. She had changed out of her heels into comfortable flats, but she still looked like a creature from another planet compared to the worn-out regulars. She pushed open the door. The bell jingled, a sound that used to trigger a panic response in her, meaning another customer she had to serve before her feet gave out. We're full, honey. Take a seat at the... Marge, the 60-year-old waitress with a beehive of gray hair and veins like road maps on her legs, stopped dead in her tracks. She dropped the dish rag she was holding. Odetta? Marge whispered. The diner went silent. Everyone knew the story. It had been on the news for weeks. The waitress who was a billionaire. Odetta smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Hi, Marge. I hope you saved me a slice of the cherry pie. Marge rushed around the counter, ignoring the health code, and pulled Odetta into a bone-crushing hug. Marge smelled like bleach and peppermint, the smell of safety. When Odetta had been kicked out by Julian, Marge was the one who snuck her leftover sandwiches so she wouldn't starve. Look at you, Marge cried, pulling back and holding Odetta's face. You look like a movie star. I told everyone you were made of tough stuff. I came to see Sal, Odetta said gently. Sal, the owner, a grumbling man who had smoked 2 packs a day since 1980, emerged from the kitchen wiping his hands on a greasy apron. He looked at Odetta, then at the floor, suddenly shy. I ain't got no money to pay you back for the shifts you missed, Odetta, Sal mumbled. I'm not here for back pay, Sal, Odetta said, her voice carrying through the silent diner. I heard you're trying to sell the place. I heard the developers want to tear it down and put up condos. Sal sighed. My knees are shot, kid. And the offer? It's the only way I can retire. I know, Odetta said. She signaled to Arthur, who stepped forward and placed a document on the sticky counter. I'm buying it, Sal, Odetta said. I'm matching the developer's offer, and I'm adding 20%. Sal's jaw dropped. You want to run a diner with your money? No, Odetta shook her head. I want Marge to run it. Marge gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I'm turning this place into a non-profit foundation, Odetta announced, turning to address the room. It will be called Lily's Kitchen. We will serve high-quality meals, pay the staff triple the minimum wage, and after 6 p.m., the doors open for free to any single mother or father who needs a hot meal for their family. No questions asked. She turned back to Marge. Full benefits, a pension, and you run the floor, Marge. You're the manager. No more double shifts on your feet. Tears streamed down Marge's face, cutting through her heavy powder. Odetta, why? We were just co-workers. No, Odetta said, taking Marge's rough hands in hers. When I had nothing, you didn't judge me. You didn't ask who I was or where I came from. You just made sure I ate. You were more family to me than the people who shared my last name. Odetta placed a check on the counter. The contractors start next week to renovate the kitchen, but the soul of the place stays. She kissed Marge on the cheek, whispered, "Thank you," and walked out. As the door closed, she heard the diner erupt in cheers. It was a better sound than any applause she had ever received in a boardroom. The day ended at the penthouse. It was a new property, not the cold, sterile mansion Julian had owned, nor the drafty apartment she had rented. It was warm, filled with soft rugs, books, and light. Odetta sat on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights flicker on. Mommy? Lily waddled out, clutching a stuffed wolf that Arthur had bought her. She was 4 years old, innocent and untouched by the cruelty of the court battle. She climbed onto Odetta's lap. "Are you sad?" Lily asked, touching Odetta's cheek. "No, baby." Odetta smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind Lily's ear. "I'm not sad. I'm just thinking." "About Daddy?" Odetta paused. She didn't want to lie, but she didn't want to poison Lily's heart. "I'm thinking about how lucky we are," Odetta said. "And I'm thinking about how strong we're going to be." Lily rested her head on Odetta Orver's chest. "I like our new house." "It doesn't have the yelling." The words broke Odetta's heart and healed it at the same time. "It doesn't have the yelling." "No more yelling," Odetta promised, kissing the top of her head. "And no more hiding." Odetta looked out at the skyline. Somewhere out there, in a gray cell, Julian was sleeping on a cot, stripped of his name, his money, and his pride. He was living the nightmare he had tried to force upon her. But Odetta wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. The ledger was balanced. The debt was paid. She looked down at her daughter, the true heiress to her heart. This was the real fortune. Not the billions in the bank, not the skyscrapers, not the power to crush her enemies. It was the peace of a quiet balcony, a sleeping child, and the knowledge that no one, absolutely no one, would ever make them feel small again. Odetta Vance, the waitress, was gone. Odetta Sterling-Caldwell, the victim, was gone. The woman sitting on the balcony was something else entirely. She was the architect of her own life. And as the stars came out over Seattle, she finally, truly began to live it. And that is how Odetta Vance turned the tables on the man who thought her poverty made her weak. It's a powerful reminder that you should never judge someone by their current situation, because you never know who they really are, or who they might become. Julian Thorne learned the hard way that the worthless waitress held the keys to his destruction all along. He thought money was power, but Odetta proved that true power comes from resilience, patience, and the courage to protect the ones you love. What do you think? Did Odetta go too far by destroying his company, or did Julian get exactly what he deserved for how he treated his family? I want to hear your opinion in the comments below. Would you have forgiven him, or would you have pressed the button just like Odetta did? If you enjoyed this story of revenge and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a crazy drama coming up next week about a cheating husband who realizes his wife is his boss. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.